Okay, so if we see what are rituals, observances, traditions, they're all devised by humans in response to their circumstances. And to that extent, they function as coping mechanisms. They allow humans to feel that they have some control over their own existence, over events that happen to them. When these rituals and traditions get recorded in textual traditions, not only do they get assimilated, classified, collated, and categorized, but they also get legitimized. So, this inclusion also brings in legitimacy and acceptance for the representing tradition itself. So, the rituals are getting legitimized, but the Puranas themselves are getting acceptance, as many rituals predate it. Many of these practices were already in existence. And so it's not only that the rituals gain validation, but even the text itself gets validation by including this. So that is the process of canonization that takes place in the making of a Puran. And in the case of these Purans, observances included not only have a stated specific purpose, but they also help in enhancing the sacral character of the text, to make it, and that is why we often say that they are religious. But in fact, one can say that it is these strategic inclusions that allow these texts to achieve a canonical status in spite of the difference in genre from the earlier textual traditions. They still get recognition. And one part of the Puranic traditions, which are very interesting, is the Vratakatha tradition. And so I'm going to spend some time discussing that. What is the Vratakatha tradition? Now, the performance of vrats involves an attempt to move out of the mundane and to create an aura of sacrality around humans. So it's more about uh, practices, religious practices, or what you do. And P.V. Carney has traced the word to the root vrit, which means to be, to remain, to abide. It denotes the laws or ordinance supposed to be laid down by all gods or individual gods. Now, Carney traces the use of the term in the Rig Veda, but there it has a different meaning because there the different deities are supposed to have vrats associated with them. So these included deities like Agni, Indra, Mitra, Som, Usha, Savitra, Adityas, and also Varun, Brihaspati, and Aditi. And this understanding of vrats on the basis of observances which particular deities were associated with, and and its association with terminology such as dhruva, immutable and unchanging. So if you take the gods and the goddesses were taking these vrats which would not be changed, and it could not, it was dhruva, and also adabdha, which means that it would be unassailable. It cannot, and after that nobody can challenge you. It shows that the vrata of one deity was not to be violated by the other. Initially, these practices were associated with deities, and it gradually came to be associated with humans. And if you see in theology, if you study religion, it seems to be a logical theological progression. Logical, not in that sense, but that is how religion works. Initially, practices are associated with the divine to give them sacrality, and then later it is the humans who perform the same activities, and that humans then derive divinity and sacrality by performing those same practices which the gods have performed before, and vratas are also in the same tradition. Now, the term vrat would has changed in time, as and these terms do change, as Patrick Olivelle has shown, with regard to the meaning of dharma, how that has changed the over time. Meaning of vrata also would have changed, and from hardships endured by deities, it changed to observances carried out by humans. So, Yask in Nirukta gives two meanings to the term vrat. It is a religious observance or a vow involving restrictions on food and behavior. And it can also mean not only restrictions on food, but some special food which is taken by a person who's carrying out a religious observances. And then you have the mention of Vrat in Samhitas and Brahmana texts also, where it depicts some kind of direct communication with deities. It seems as if a direct communication with deities is set up through the performance of Vrats. Um, and especially if there is abstention or maintenance of rigorous practices over a over a long period of time. One of the early texts, the Taittiriya Samhita, associates the performance of Rats with the practice of the Dikshita, the initiate, who observes the Vrat of taking milk only from one udder of a cow, then two udders, and then three or four. And it's called the Shurapavi, or the razor edge vrat, where you are living only on little drops of milk of a cow. Gradually, they also mention that barley gruel is the subsistence for a kshatriya in this kind of a vrat, and for the vaishya, it is different. It is a different meal totally. So there are references to the kshatriya dikshita and the vaishya dikshita. So again, from the time of the Taittiriya Samhita itself, which we find that there are some indications of vrata traditions associated with restriction of food and different types of food for different varna categories. The Shatpat Brahman refers to food or milk which has to be had as the vrat. So, by the time of the Brahmana text, the term vrat means not only an observance but can also be used for food in special observances, and it becomes related to fasting or upavas. And in Etre Brahman, there is reference to how the gods take offerings only if somebody has undergone an upvas. So only if humans are purified through upvas, and it's only somebody who's pure that gods will accept the offerings. And in that sense, then Vrat and Upvas seem to come together in the Aitreya Brahman. And this is seen in the Shota Sutras also, which associate the term mostly on one hand with the Dikshita, or the initiate who's carrying out a sacrifice, or the Snataka. Snataka is one who has gone through the Samavartana bath, which is after finishing of studentship, you take the bath, and that is why even now graduates are called Snataka. Snataka means having undergone the ritual bath of after having completed your studies. Now, so once the the reference to the snataka with the vrata is that once he has become a snataka, he is expected to maintain vows like not eating flesh, not seeing women, or even polluting as things like Shudras or crows while carrying out such vrats. So, this attempt at creating purity and pollution taboos can be seen, and how that is again related to the vrata tradition. So, a snataka or even a brahmachari, they are seen as epitomes of purity. And then women, shudras, crows, these are seen as polluting, and so they have to be kept apart spatially. Now, you also have some references in the Dharma Sutras to how vratas are being performed by Brahman couples. They would, the husband and wife would perform the vrat together, um, fasting on the Parva days. Panini refers to the term in the sense of acts that are done. So he says, Vratayati vratam karoti, so something which you have done. While Kashika refers to the Vartika, talking about food as well as abstention from it. So similarly, Manu, Yagyavalkya, Shankha have all used the term Vrata, and it seems to include prayashchit or expiations for sins done. In the Mahabharat, it seems to imply restrictions in behavior, at what you cannot do. So if you take a vrat, so the word also means taking off a vow. For example, Yudhishthir had taken a vrat to play the dice when challenged to do so. Similarly, you talk about the Bhishma Pitama having taken vrat. So, it's like a vow where you can, not change it. And if you when it comes to relating this discussion of related to vratas to rites conducted by women, we can see that there are two notions of vrata. There are different notions of vrata associated to women. So on one hand you have the pati vrata notion, and then you have the vrata kathas. So the pati vrata is one who has taken the vow of serving her husband, and so she doesn't, no other vrat is this comparable to that. And so women are expected to pursue the former, and it is only in gradually that you have texts and traditions where ritual activities are extended to include performance of different vrats for women. And in the Shanti Parv in the Mahabharat, it is mentioned again that anybody who's doing a vrat should not converse with women, Shudras, or Patitas. So you can see on one hand, for men, conduct of a vrat means being pure, and so staying away from impure, what is regarded as impure or polluting things. And on the other hand, it's also trying to show that it is men who perform the vrat. And so it is male centered in that sense. It's talking about how men perform the vrat. Now, while this seems to show that vrats may have been inaccessible to these categories, in the Mahabharata itself, the Anushashan Parv mentions that there is no higher tapas than the Upavas or anything equal to it, and even poor men get rewards of sacrifices if they observe this. So it's not as if poor people are not included in doing these vrats. And so the notion of vrat being different for women as compared to men is underlined in Dharma Shastric literature, because the authors of the Dharma Shastras compare marriage of a woman to Upanayan, the initiation rite of boys. And so while boys are initiated into a ritual and sacred life as a brahmacharin under the tutelage of an acharya, the girls do not get any formal learning or tutelage, and their initiation into a ritual role is only when they get married. So there is this clear distinction between how men and women perform vrats, and in that sense, we find that the Dharma Shastra authors, to a large extent, give validation to women only when they are fulfilling their reproductive roles, either as wives or mothers. So, in that sense, Dharma Shastras are not taking account of women who may not be fulfilling these roles. So even though daughters and sisters are very much part of the domestic household, they're not given as much recognition as mothers or wives. And that is something where, which I've talked about in an article of mine, where I've talked about the hierarchization in the family itself, within the women also. So um, this is very different in the Purans, because in Purans we find that they are discussing vrats and very categorically mentioning that women and unmarried and widowed or whatever can also do this particular vrat. So they are, in that sense, very consciously putting in that line that women can perform these vrats. So here we find a major deviation from the Dharma Shastric traditions, where Manu is saying that there is no fast, no upvas for a woman, and she has to seek the permission of her husband if she wants to do that. On the other hand, the Purans are saying that such and such a vrat, women should do them, unmarried women should do them, etc., etc. So that itself shows a shift, ideological shift that we see in the Purans. Also, the other thing that we see in the Purans is you know, the projection of puja versus homa. Homa is the fire ritual. Puja is when you are, just doing worship. And the difference between home and puja seems to be highlighted in the Purans. The former involves fire with Vedic mantras, and that is not allowed either to women or to Shudras, whereas puja seems to be allowed for all. Although usually it is mentioned that it's the Brahmins who undertake the elaborate puja rituals and the 16 upachars, or the 16 different ways in which puja is done. But the Purans also talk about how you can worship the deity through puja, through the performance of nitya and kamya rites, and they are all aimed towards the fulfillment of different aspirations. Now, the word puja itself is it's explained in the Shiva Puran, which is a much later work. So, one doesn't know exactly what its origins are. But it mentions that the word puja comes from the root puh, which means the achievement of fruits of enjoyment, and jayate, which means is born. So, birth of fruits of enjoyment. So, getting fal for doing something. And you also have references from the kind of rituals that are mentioned. There are daily and occasional rites which yield fruits, and the fruits of kamya rites are supposed to be instantaneous. So Carney has shown how religious observances can be divided into three categories: Nitya, which is obligatory; Naimetika, which is to be performed when a particular occasion is there; and Kamya, which are performed out of desire for something, when you want something. And in that sense, the bulk of the vrats seem to be kamya in order to get particular rewards. Now, Mary McGee has studied rituals related to women, And she has shown how rites that are classified into nitya, which is obligatory, and kamya, which is optional, is true. But whether women had whether they could exercise choices in the performance of such rituals is debatable, because very often family traditions or family expectations would mean that even the kamya, which is optional, may have to be done and you're obliged to do them. Of course, she also says that votive rites, the seasonal votive rites that happen, are an expression of a woman's attempt to negotiate her space in ritual traditions. So, women are able to gain some space in ritual traditions only through rituals, and that is what I have also said in this work of mine, which is called Contestation and Compliance, and retrieving women's agency in Puranic traditions. And in this work, I've tried to show how the relationship between women and religion is complex, because women seek to gain access to religious spaces, even though all religions are essentially male centric and in that sense, give primary importance to males. But in spite of that, because women are part of the society, they also feel that they need to have some degree of agency, and the only way they are able to negotiate that agency or get some decision making power or some some roles in the household is through ritual means and performing of vrats and expression of religiosity. So why do people want to perform vrats? There are these texts which tell us that vrats were projected as a means for achieving cognizable human goals and aspirations. And the Agni Puran mentions some of these aspirations. So it's dharma, or for getting punya, and then progeny, children, wealth, beauty, good fortune, virtues, fame, learning, long life, wealth, purity, enjoyment of pleasures, heaven, and moksha. So these are the various reasons why you want to perform vrats. And the Agni Puran also says that vrat involves restrictive rules and compares it to tap, which involves hardships, but also doing it as per a niyam in a regulated way. And the emphasis in all this seems to be on the performance of rites, which allow for the declaration of intent as well as of harnessing of mental and physical strength to carry out the vrat in its normal course. And also, Agni Puran says that jap, home, dan at the end of all the vrats. So jap, home, and then of course dan. Dan is to Brahmins. At the end of all vrats shows how 10 virtues are essential for the performance of vrats. And these 10 virtues are forbearance, truthfulness, compassion, charity, purity, curbing the organs of sense, worship of deities, offerings into fire, contentment, and not depriving others of their property. So from this, understanding, you can understand that how vrata traditions are used, the rites or the rituals are used as mechanisms to ensure proper behavior. It was a way to make the ideology of the Purans more relevant, but it was also very inclusive in the sense that women are also a lot of vrata traditions, and that is why I talk about the suvrata pativrata wife, which is how women are roped in for performing of these vrats, and how women play an important role in propagation and as patrons of the Puranic ideology. And it's something that is not always recognized and not given cognizance to, but one has to keep that in mind when we are discussing the social and the cultural aspects of the Purans. So I'll stop here, and there's so much more that one can discuss about this topic. But since this is the limit of, this is what I had decided to speak on, I will stop here, and hope you have had a good session. Thank you.